In the garages of Addis Ababa, in the hills of Beirut, on the cracked highways of Morocco, one car keeps moving when everything else has stopped. The Mercedes-Benz W124, built between 1984 and 1997. Still running, still carrying families to work, still hauling cargo across borders that didn't exist when it was new. This is the car that made Mercedes-Benz a legend. And then, quietly, they stopped making anything like it. To understand why the W124 refuses to die, you have to understand when it was born, the early 1980s. Mercedes-Benz was not a luxury brand. Not yet. Not in the way we think of luxury today. They were engineers first, accountants second. And the W124 was their masterpiece of philosophy, the idea that a car should be built once and built forever. Development began in 1976, 8 years before the first model rolled off the line. 8 years. Mercedes spent more time developing the W124 than some manufacturers spent building an entire generation of vehicles. They tested prototypes for over 5 million kilometers. They crashed them, froze them, baked them in desert heat. They ran them until parts failed. And then they redesigned those parts until they didn't. The result was a car engineered not for a 5-year loan cycle, but for a lifetime. The body structure was revolutionary. Mercedes used a technique called single-layer phosphating, followed by cathodic dip priming. They applied wax to every hollow cavity. They used galvanized steel panels in areas prone to corrosion. Most cars of the 1980s rusted from the inside out within a decade. The W124 did not. 30 years later, original paint still shines on cars that have crossed 300,000 miles. 40 years later, body panels remain solid, while the roads beneath them have been repaved twice. But rust protection was only the beginning. The suspension system used a multi-link rear setup, 5 separate arms controlling each wheel. Mercedes invented this configuration for the W124. It was expensive, it was complex, it was over-engineered by every standard of its time. And it worked. The car tracked straight at autobahn speeds while absorbing broken pavement without complaint. Other manufacturers looked at this system and called it excessive. Then they copied it for the next 4 decades. The engines were monuments to simplicity. The M102 and M103, inline 4s and 6s. The OM601, OM602, and OM603 diesels. These were not engines designed to impress with power figures. They were designed to start every morning, in every climate, for decades. The OM602 diesel became legendary in its own right, a 2.5-liter 5-cylinder that produced modest horsepower but seemed incapable of mechanical failure. Taxi fleets in Germany ran these engines past 1 million kilometers. Not rebuilt, original. One documented example, a 1991 W124 taxi in Greece crossed 2.8 million kilometers before the owner finally retired it. The engine was still running. The transmission was original. He simply got too old to drive. But the W124's immortality is not just engineering. It is philosophy. Every component was designed to be serviced. Bolts were accessible. Panels came off with hand tools. Wiring harnesses were routed logically. A mechanic in Stuttgart could work on this car. So could a mechanic in Nairobi. So could a farmer in rural Pakistan with a socket set and a flashlight. Mercedes understood something that modern manufacturers have forgotten. A car is only as durable as its ability to be repaired. The W124 could always be repaired. And so it was. In developing nations where new cars are unaffordable and used cars must last generations, the W124 became more than transportation. It became infrastructure. In Ethiopia, W124s formed the backbone of the taxi fleet. Not some of them. Most of them. Cars built in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Still working, still earning, still carrying passengers through streets that would destroy modern vehicles in months. In Lebanon, the W124 survived a civil war, an economic collapse, and decades of neglect. They run on improvised repairs and decades-old parts. They run anyway. In Morocco, they haul goods across the Atlas Mountains. In Iran, they're handed down through families like heirlooms. This is not nostalgia. This is survival. The W124 endures because it was built to endure. Because over-engineering, once dismissed as inefficient, turns out to be the only engineering that matters when decades have passed and everything else has failed. Mercedes-Benz knew what they had created, and then they walked away from it. The W210, which replaced the W124 in 1995, was a different philosophy. Lighter, cheaper to produce, more focused on electronics and comfort features. It rusted, it developed electrical problems, it aged poorly in ways the W124 never did. Mercedes had learned that building cars to last forever was bad for business. Customers who never need a new car never buy a new car. And so the philosophy changed. Planned obsolescence crept in. Cost-cutting followed. The brand that built the W124 became the brand that built cars designed to be replaced. The W124 stands as evidence of what was lost, not just a car, a commitment. The idea that excellence meant permanence, that engineering meant building something better than it needed to be. Today, a clean W124 is worth more than it sold for new, adjusted for inflation. Collectors pay premiums for low-mileage examples. But the real W124s, the ones that matter, are not in collections. They're working. They're crossing their 5th country, their 3rd owner, their 2nd engine rebuild. They are parked outside apartments in cities that have changed governments twice since they were built. They are covered in dust on unpaved roads, carrying families who cannot afford to replace them and do not need to. The Mercedes-Benz W124 refuses to die because it was never designed to. It was designed to serve, and 40 years later, it still does. In a world of disposable machines, the W124 remains, not as a relic, as proof that when engineers build without compromise, when accountants do not dictate specifications, when a company decides that reputation matters more than quarterly earnings, something extraordinary becomes possible. A car that outlives its creators, a car that outlives its era, a car that simply refuses to stop. The W124, still running, still here, And if history is any guide, still running long after we've forgotten what made it possible.